Okay. All righty, everybody. So welcome. We are now live and also recording. So for anybody that wants to record, I'll be watching the comments on YouTube for if anybody is wants to ask questions. So welcome everybody to the Grand Strand Astronomers, the Myrtle Beach Astronomy Club, the Myrtle Beach Area Astronomy Club for our September meeting. First of all, I'd like to apologize. I know we were planning on doing the meeting face-to-face. However, after we kind of made a decision after discussing it that we would still have one more virtual meeting. I'm sorry, is that someone asking a question? No, guess not. So we said we'll do one more purely virtual meeting, and so we're going to target for the October meeting of doing a face-to-face meeting at Coastal Carolina University. Assuming conditions warrant. Should that be the case, it will be a hybrid meeting, which means I'll book the room I will book will have several large screen projectors in it, and I'll have a Zoom session as well. So if you don't want to come face to face in the October meeting, you can attend virtually, live. So we're going to do a hybrid, and we're going to give that a try. That should work just fine. Those rooms are set up very well with large projectors on each side that are slave to each other. So it should work pretty well. And then of course the internet access is quite good. So that will be that's the plan for the October meeting. So the only thing, just to remind everybody that there is a mask mandate there at Coastal Carolina University. So anybody that decides to attend face-to-face will need to wear a mask indoors. That's a university policy. Again, the alternative is you can attend virtually, no problem. So let's see, a couple of other little things. Everybody that went out in our observing session on September 11th, I think had a pretty good time. We had really caught a great break on the weather. So we do have more observing sessions scheduled. We have one on the 9th of October, the 6th of November, and the 4th of December. Those are all Saturdays. I know originally we were talking about doing, the second Friday of every month as the observing session. But what we've done is we picked the Saturday nearest to the new moon. And we've done that because it's a little better for our observing site, Hampton Plantation, to do it on Saturday. And it's a little bit better for our partnership with the Low Country Stargazers. So I will put these on our website, and I'll send out email, these dates via email as well. I do recommend, if you are not on the email list, you can send me an email or just, let me know, and we'll make sure you're on the email list, because that's where you'll get the most timely updates on observing and everything. So speaking of Hampton Plantation, which is our dark sky observing site, which is right on the border of the Francis Marion National Forest, it is a nice dark sky site. The process of applying for being IDA Dark Sky Park is well underway, and hoping to have all those applications in this year. So, that's going pretty well. The park is very supportive of astronomical observing, and is doing a great job. I think anybody who attended the observing session can tell that. So, we are, I mentioned the website. We do have the website at gsastro.org. You can look at the front page. There's still some work to be done on the remaining pages, and it's basically being gated by the amount of time I can put into it and figure out why some of the formatting on the back pages is not exactly the way I want. But it will have all the events on there, and it will have all kinds of information. So that will kind of be developed over the next month or so, hopefully. If anybody wants to help out with the website, even if it's just to create content, please let me know. I'm glad to take the help. So other than that, I don't really think I have any announcements. Gerald, do you have anything you'd like to say before we get on with our great presentation tonight?
No, I'm good. Nothing from the secretary's standpoint. Well, I do have a question. You know, I send the notes out just to a limited few. Uh, do you want the notes to go to everybody in the group?
I'll have to ask the group about that. I guess my gut response would be to post them on the website.
Yes, that's
And we can have like a members only or something. And so if anybody wants to see them, they certainly can.
okay.
If anybody else feels strongly about getting them an email, let us know.
All right. Well, we'll look to post them then.
Yeah, I guess the only other thing I wanted to mention is to remind everybody that because you're a member of an astronomy club, you do get a discount for Sky and Telescope magazine. So you definitely want to mention you're a member of the, you want to go to the club renewal site. I guess I can put something out on email about that if you subscribe to Sky and Telescope. So, okay, well, without further ado, I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker tonight. In fact, I probably actually I've known her for, oh my gosh, a long time now. Well, I've known her for a long time. She was obviously quite young when I first met her. So, I'll let Phyllis introduce herself because she can, talk about, a little bit about her background, probably more than I can. So.
Okay. So I've got my slideshow about ready to start. There we go.
You should be able to share their screen.
Yeah.
If not, let's see. I may have to make you a co-host.
No, I can do it. Well, I can do it, I think. Shall I share?
Yes.
That one. Yep. Better.
Good job.
Okay, so everybody can hear me? Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
And I assume the video is coming through. Good.
Looks great.
Well, then I would introduce myself. My name is Phyllis Lang, and Ian knew me up in the Raleigh area. I've been observing for many years, and as we will learn in a moment or two, I've used all kinds of different kinds of instruments. I did write some software called Deep Sky Planner, which is available for Windows and mobile. And I've also worked with a light pollution meter, a light meter, a sky quality meter, and there's some software I write that will read data from that and contribute it to various repositories that use the data for science or just for mapping or such. So I've done a few things in my career as a computer programmer and as my astronomy hobby has taken me. So let's see if I can get, there we go. Yeah, so why me? Why does anybody want to hear about binocular observing from me? Pardon me. My very first astronomical observing was back in the summer of 1969. Back in those days, I was extremely interested in the Apollo moon landings. And once Aldrin and Armstrong landed on the moon, I decided that I should sneak outside with the family binoculars and look at the moon and see if I could see them. Well, my binoculars weren't quite big enough to see them, but my experience of looking at the moon was pretty much a life changer. I could not believe how much I could see. So moving on in time, I've had access to binoculars for many years. I have observed various deep sky objects. I have observed comets. And at one point, I observed everything in the Binocular Messier Award list and received that award for my efforts. And more recently, say the last 10 years, I have been reading more of binocular observing articles, and I've learned a lot about what you can view, a little bit about the equipment and so on. So I hope to share that with you tonight. Whoops, I always roll it the wrong way. So why would you be interested in observing with binoculars? And the first reason is that most people usually have a pair and they know how to use them. So that's a no-cost startup solution. You can go out as soon as this talk is over and look at the sky, and you'll be ready to go. They're very portable. It doesn't take a lot of effort to get a lot of telescopes and so forth out and set up. So just to sneak out for a quick look is very doable. And it's one of the attractions to learning to observe with binoculars. So it turns out that as you use binoculars, you will find there's an awful lot of stuff that you can see. You don't have to have a big telescope to see a lot of things. Of course, they're better for a lot of things. But it's true that there are certain things in the sky that are really better viewed with binoculars. And they are normally large things in the sky, especially comets with long tails, or some of the larger deep sky objects. So if you're wondering what type of binoculars might be best, any binocular will work. And the better the optical quality is, the better they will work for you. So by that I would mean better glass that's doesn't have bubbles in the glass. They're probably clean. They do need to focus properly in order for you to be able to get the best views. So some binoculars have one focuser that will focus both eyepieces, and there's maybe one adjustment. I don't know if you can see here, but around the eyepiece, you might be able to adjust the one center focusing rocker style switch, and then maybe tweak in one of the eyes with the eyepiece. This pair happens to have a focuser on each eye lens. So I have written down exactly where I like to set these so that it is in focus for me. And so if I bump them in transporting them, or my husband uses them or something, I know how to get right back to a sharp view myself. And it's because these binoculars have some markings on them. So I can change the setting and put it exactly where I want them. Now, not every set of binoculars will have that, but these happen to. Now, if you're really new with binoculars, you will probably know that you've seen them listed as something like 8x50. And that means that the magnification of the system is 8 power. And the 50 indicates the aperture of each lens, 50 millimeters. So remember, that's 50 millimeters, and you have two eyes, so you're doing pretty well there. I like to call this picture the three bears picture. These are three sets of binoculars that I use. Starting on the right, that's a little sport binocular. We typically use those at football games or basketball games, but I've also used them to look at the night sky. Those are 10 power by 25 millimeters, so they're really small compared to the other two, but super handy. The middle pair is my husband's 7x50 pair. They're 7 power by 50 millimeter, so the lenses are twice as big as the others. And then the biggest pair I have are the 16 power by 70 millimeter. Those were bought specifically to look at comets. And we'll get to their drawback in a moment. So if we agree that the magnifying power of the eye alone, naked eye observing, is 1 power, then an 8 power by 50 binocular has a magnification of 8. So each side has 8 times magnification compared to just your eyes. The magnification obviously makes the targets look larger. You're able to see more detail. For a good comparison, think about the camera on your smartphone. As you zoom in, you're able to see more detail on the camera view. The larger the aperture of the lenses, the more light is collected for your eyes. It turns out really that the most important thing, in my opinion, for your optical instrument is the aperture as compared to the magnification. Think of the aperture as the gathering of the photons falling out of the sky towards your eye. If you were in the desert and you were really thirsty, would you rather be catching the one rainstorm that comes over with a tiny cup or with a giant wash tub? Well, you would catch more water with the wash tub. So it's a similar concept with these lenses, the apertures. The more photons can be collected with a larger aperture, the more you can see. So to give a comparison, this is a little bit surprising to a lot of people. The eye, the dark adapted eye, naked eye observing, for younger people, probably younger than me, is 7 millimeters. The older you get, the smaller that aperture becomes. And it is possible to measure the aperture of your eye, but that's a little beyond the scope of this discussion. If you think about that 8x50 binocular we talked about a minute ago, it gathers 51 times more light per lens as compared to just your eye. How did I do that? Well, this is the area of circles compared. So if you remember the old pi r squared is the area of a circle, then I've got the radius of that binocular lens, 25, and squared, and I divide that by the radius of your eye, which is 3.5. And if you do that arithmetic, you come up with 51 times, and that's per side. So you really are able to gather much more light into your eye. The one drawback with this is that the increased aperture means more glass, which means more weight. And heavier binoculars are harder to hold still. But there are ways to deal with that. If you've ever held your smartphone camera and you zoomed it way in on something far away, you probably noticed some jiggle. And that's the shakiness in your hand being amplified by the optics. The same thing will happen with binoculars. The more power those binoculars have, the more shakiness you will see. Something that I do very often when I just run outside with a medium-sized binocular to take a quick look is I will stabilize my arms on the hood of a car or a fence or the mailbox or what have you. And if I hold the body of the binoculars, not firmly, not a tight grip, but firm enough to make sure I don't drop them, it improves the stability a lot to be able to do that. I did see someone write an article not too long ago about getting a telescoping handle mop so that he could adjust the height of the monopod. And he strapped his binoculars with a bungee cord on the spongy side of the mop, and that held his binoculars for him. Another thing you can do is something I did as a child. It didn't take long observing the moon to realize that my hands were shaking. So what I would do would be, and this is July, of course, I would lay down in the grass in my front yard, and I would balance binoculars on the orbits of my eyes and hold them fairly gently. And that was very effective in eliminating the shake. Now, that's not going to work with a really large pair of binoculars, but with that medium size 8x50 lot, it really helps a lot. You may I've laid down on picnic tables. I've gotten into beach lounge chairs, whatever it takes to get you somewhat horizontal, and then just balance the binoculars on your eyes. Another thing that can work is a camera tripod, and I'll show that rig in a few minutes and explain what worked and what didn't. And my most recent discovery is a terrific thing for binocular observing, and that's image stabilizing binoculars. A friend was out observing comets one night, and I had been looking in those big 16x70 binoculars on this big mount, and the views were wonderful. But he handed me his Canon image stabilized binoculars. And I was shocked at how well they work. But somehow the electronics negate the shake of your hands and they become very, very stable. So they are more expensive. And if you decide you want to go that way, I would really urge you to try a pair. They really work nicely. Come on, come on. Yeah, so mounting. Well, the camera tripod mount, I had a photo tripod, a standard photo tripod with a normal head and a 1/4 bolt that went up. So I got myself something called an L bracket. You get these at the camera store, and it really is shaped like an L. You screw the bottom of the L into the camera tripod head, and you could screw into the front part of the binoculars. Now, not every pair of binoculars have this ability. I'm going to show you the front of these. There's no hole there. But a lot of binoculars will have a cap right here that you can pop off, and there's a 1/4 threaded hole there. And that's what it's for. It's for putting on one of these L brackets on a camera tripod. So when I first got those 16x70 Fujinon binoculars, I was so excited to get them. I went outside with the camera tripod and I put them on the L bracket and fastened them to the mount. And within 5 minutes, I decided that wasn't going to work so well. Probably mostly because those binoculars were so heavy. So I did a little shopping and I found the parallelogram mount, which was designed for a heavier binocular. And that was definitely the way to go. If you look at this series of pictures, you can see the different types of mountings. Can you see my cursor? Yeah? Yeah. Okay,
Yes.
so these are the larger binoculars. They're 16x70. They weigh a couple of pounds. And this is the long part of the L bracket, which is screwed into the top of the tripod. It's just a photo tripod is all that is. So that's how the arrangement will look. This is another view of it from the front, and you can really see this L bracket well, and you can see how it screws into the front of those binoculars. Really a nice firm mounting, but the problem I had was in adjusting the altitude and the azimuth clutches. The binoculars were so heavy that it was kind of hard to get these locked down and have the view not move. So about 5 minutes with that was enough for me with that particular pair of binoculars, and I decided to get something else. So I ended up with this, which is a parallelogram mount, and it has the counterweight system on it, so it's able to deal with the weight of the bigger binoculars much better. It also has an L bracket in the top of it, and it has several different ranges of motion. You can push it around in azimuth here. You can adjust the altitude of your view here. And the great thing about these is being a parallelogram mount, If I just use this handle and pull it down, I don't lose the view of whatever I was looking at. If I push it straight up, I don't lose the view. So at my house, it's really helpful because my husband's about 6'3" and I'm only about 5'6". So if we want to go look at a comet, I can find the comet with the binoculars and I'm looking. And then husband comes along and wants to look, and he can just push the whole rig straight up in the air, a foot or whatever, and he can have a comfortable view too. So this is a lot more stability for you. It turns out that this tripod was something that my husband had built and stopped using. I do know for a fact there are tripods that you can buy with parallelogram mounts. So if you're not handy or you don't have the stuff to make one, you can always buy one. So that's the parallelogram mount. And here it is viewed from the front. Here's that L bracket. And the guys who made it for me put my initials on there for some reason, but well, whatever. Yeah, so now we know a little bit about the equipment and how to mount it. What can you actually do with them? You can really do a lot, surprising a lot. You don't really have to have an expensive telescope. Of course, the smaller, dimmer objects are going to look much, much better in a telescope than in binoculars. But the larger things are going to be a lot better in binoculars because you're going to be able to see them all in one view. And as is true with telescopes, the darker your observing location, the better your results will be, because light pollution is bad for everything except solar observing. This is the obligatory warning. Don't ever look through the sun with your binoculars unless you have special solar filters. Even if you look briefly through binoculars at the sun, it will permanently damage your eyes. There have been experiments where someone mounted binoculars and put a piece of paper where your eyes would go behind the binoculars, and the paper caught fire. So you don't want that going on in your eyes. You'll ruin your eyes. So with that stated, things you can look at are the moon. I learned this in 1969 that getting a good steady view of the moon was fantastic. It was like being in an airliner flying over the surface of the moon. It just was incredible. You can make out the mountains and the craters and the smooth basins in Maria. It's really cool. So if you were to go out tonight, I think the moon's probably going to rise in about an hour or hour and a half. You can point your binoculars at the moon and be sure to look at the terminator, which is it's the line between the darkness and the sunlit side of the moon. So we've got a gibbous moon, meaning it's not quite a full moon, but it's a fairly full moon. If you look at the terminator there, you will see a lot of relief, a lot of detail on the mountains and the craters along that terminator, and it's a really cool view. If you try to do this, make sure you steady up your binoculars in your hands, either by leaning on something or lying down and putting them against your face or using a tripod. The moon will look really bright to you in binoculars, but it won't be bright enough to damage your eyes like the sun would. You can also observe the planets with binoculars, most of them. If you were to look at Mars, Mars is not super well placed at the moment, but you will notice that it has color. It'll be a small, probably a star-like looking image, but you'll notice it has color and it'll be orange. If you look at Jupiter, which will be up tonight, it'll be a creamy yellow color. And if you look at Saturn, it'll be a pale yellow color. But the cool thing about Saturn, even in 8x50 binoculars, is you can tell that it is not round, it is elongated. And that's because of its rings. You can't resolve the rings in medium-sized binoculars, But you can tell they're there because the shape of the planet looks different from everything else. So that's pretty cool, and you can notice the color change. If you are looking at Jupiter, you might see the 4 little moons that look like little stars lined up in the same plane as the belts of Jupiter. So if you drew a parallel line through Jupiter, through its belts out to the sides, you might see up to 4 little tiny stars, and those are Jupiter's moons. Now, sometimes when you look, there won't be 4, there'll be 3 or 2. And that's because some of those moons are either in front of Jupiter and you can't see them, or they're behind Jupiter and Jupiter's blocking them. So it's always a good idea to look for those moons and see how many you can see. Another thing you can notice, and this is, I'm not so sure it's up still, but Venus. If you look at Venus, Venus is a very white planet, but it's large enough you can tell the phase. You can tell whether it's a nice circle or maybe half a circle, or like the moon tonight, a gibbous circle, meaning almost circular, but not quite. So you can tell the phases of Venus. Now, you won't be able to see some of the further out planets. Mercury is really small, and if you see it, it'll look like a star, but it'll be a pinkish color. And again, be very careful observing Mercury. Make sure you don't accidentally point at the sun. Uranus is visible as a blue-green dot. I don't think you're going to see any more detail than that. Neptune and Pluto are going to be too dim for you to see, unfortunately, with binoculars. My favorite thing to look at with the binoculars is comets. And depending on where the comet is in its orbit, if it's close to the Earth, it is more likely to have a bigger coma or head and a brighter tail. And it is in that point of the comet's orbit that I really enjoy looking at the comet. The shapes of the tails vary comet to comet, and the amount of the size of the coma, the amount of outgassing from the head of the comet varies. They're all different. If the comet is further away from Earth and the sun, binoculars become less favorable because the comet gets dimmer, smaller, and the tail will go away. So look for comets when they're close to Earth with binoculars. They're an excellent choice for seeing the comets. Now all we need is a new comet, huh? Here again, the moonless location, if you want to look for the diffuse tail of a comet or the diffuse outgassing around the coma, you're not going to see those in a light polluted area or if the moon is up. So depending on what you want to see, you might want to wait for a moonless night or go out where the light pollution is not so bad. As far as deep sky objects go, I feel like the larger things, the brighter things, are the things that are the most interesting to observe. I really think open clusters are the best category for this, because open clusters can be very white stars on a dark background, and they're generally spread out a little more than some of the other types of deep sky objects. So right now you might look at the Gemini and Auriga clusters, M35, 36, 37, 38. They become better placed in the night sky towards cold weather. So I think that they will provide wonderful targets for you in, I don't know, 2 months maybe. Now, you can also see the globular clusters in your binoculars, but they're going to look probably like little fuzz balls. If your binoculars are a little bit larger, they begin to resolve into tiny points of light. And that's what you're looking for. You're trying to determine whether you can resolve the stars in one of these globular clusters or not. And right now, M13 and M92, which are both clusters in Hercules, are well placed and large. M13, the Great Hercules Cluster, is pretty easy to find. It usually shows up on any star chart, and you can see those very definitely with binoculars. Another thing you might want to look at right now are two diffuse nebulae, M8 and M20. They're both visible right now. And if you do see these, if you can pick out the constellation of Sagittarius, both of those will be directly above what we call the spout of the teapot in Sagittarius. You will almost certainly see M8, the lagoon. You may also see M20, the Trifid. It's higher up, further away from the horizon, above M8. So it's almost like they're the steam coming from the teapot kettle. Interesting. Another sort of interesting thing that I've seen done, and this is especially useful if you're in a dark site. I use ultra high contrast filter for my telescope observing. I don't have two, but I have seen people thread an ultra high contrast filter into each eyepiece of binoculars and view really large deep sky objects. This is a super cool effect. If you enjoy that kind of thing, you might look into getting two filters to fit onto your binoculars. Anything that is a diffuse nebula, they will help with most planetaries, even though most planetaries are small. They won't do anything for you with galaxies, though, or planets. If you were to have a more broadband filter, a deep sky type filter, you could use it the same way, putting one filter on each eyepiece to look at something like the Great Andromeda Galaxy, M31, or the Triangulum Galaxy, M33. I've seen both of those in binoculars numerous times, and I've never had the luxury of any type of filter to use. So the views that I've had that were the most impressive were from dark locations, really good dark locations without street lights coming in from the sides. Really cool. And yet, again, I can remember looking at M31 with binoculars, just laying on a picnic table outside in cold weather. You know, you go out for a couple of minutes, you look and you go back inside. It's really a quickie. It's a quick, easy way to see something. Now, you can also observe with your binoculars variable stars and double stars. And I think it's true to say that the Europeans seem to be more into variable star observing than the Americans. With a variable star, you know, you learn how to judge the brightness of the stars as compared to something else that doesn't vary. And so if you were to, generally the monthly magazine Sky and Telescope will tell you when Albireo is going to be maximum. And Albireo is a varying star. I'm sorry, I'm saying Albireo and I mean Algol. It's a varying star in brightness. And the game is to learn which star varies in brightness and compare its brightness to another. And you can find this kind of information on the AAVSO website. They are aavso.org. They'll give you charts and things so that you can observe variable stars with binoculars. And then the other thing is double stars. I think Americans do a fair bit of this. Most stars, as you may or may not know, seem to be in multiple star systems, doubles, triples, whatever. a single star like our sun is less usual. So if you have a double star that you want to view, you can see the two stars, and Alberio is a nice example. You can look at them through the binoculars and try to determine whether you can separate the double star into 2 points of light. The second thing you can do is determine what colors you see. So I think with Alberio, you've got a yellow star and a blue star, which is nice contrast between the two. And if you can determine that with your binocular observing, you might really appreciate the view, being a color contrasting pair. I really enjoy doing that just to see how much color I can see. And again, the darker your location, the more color you're liable to see. But sometimes the stars are a bit too dim for you to see color in your binoculars. But still, it's a fun thing to learn how to do. So we've been through a lot of the highlights, but there are thousands more things to look at. You might want to look at carbon stars that are deep red. You might want to look at different kinds of nebulae like planetary nebulae. They are usually small, but if you wanted to look at a large planetary nebula, look for the double helix nebula in Aquarius. It should be up late evening. And if you happen to have UHC filters, use it. I would love to have that view, and I don't have the filters to do it with. But again, larger objects are really suited well to binoculars. If you want to begin to learn about things to observe, other than the things that just come to mind, the monthly astronomy magazines, some of them have a special column for you to find things to observe through binoculars. And they have charts to help you find the interesting item and a description of what the objects look like or what binocular it took to see them. If you look in Sky and Telescope, I think it's in the center of the magazine where the Atlas chart is, the round sky chart is. There is usually a column there by Matt Weedle, and it's called Binocular Highlight. And he usually describes one or two things for you to try to find. There's another column in one of my favorites. I've been taking Sky and Telescope for 30 years, but I've learned of a new magazine that comes out of UK called Sky at Night. And you can buy that at the newsstand if you don't want to subscribe. But there's a wonderful column in there every month by a fellow named Steve Tonkin. And he lists several targets that you might view in binoculars. He describes them and he gives a chart so you can find them. So that column is really terrific. And I think that Steve is recognized as something as an expert because he has written a book along with some of these others. It turns out that I have had Touring the Universe Through Binoculars, which is this one. It's a paperback. I've had this book for many years. It's written by Phil Harrington, who you may recognize as a writer for Astronomy magazine. Another book that I have is called Binocular Highlights, which was written by a Canadian fellow named Gary Saronic. He wrote their column for a while, but now Matt Weedle is writing it. Then the Binocular Astronomy column and book by Steve Tonkin. So Steve also publishes a monthly newsletter that you can download for free. And if you like QR codes, this is the URL to his site. I'll put his URL, which is also here. I'll put it in the chat at the end of the talk so that you'll be able to have that URL. So that's a free newsletter with chart and descriptions. So that's an invaluable resource, I think. Another resource you might want to try are Astronomical League observing programs. They have the Binocular Messier program where you observe. I think there are a couple of different levels of the Binocular Messier, and I think the maximum you have to do is 70, minimum's like 50. Here again, here's the QR code if you want to go to that website, and I will post the website at the end of the talk and text in the chat. There's also a deep sky binocular program in the Astronomical League, and this QR code describes their website, and I'll post at the end of the talk. Both of those programs are really helpful in that they give you a list of objects that are viewable in binoculars. And if I'm not mistaken, they're divided up by the time of year that you can observe them. So it's very helpful to have some guidance to go out with your binoculars and be able to tick things off and reach a goal. One last thought. The pair of binoculars that I've been showing you during this talk are a little bit old. This is a photo of the binoculars as I found them in the drawer at my mother's house when I inherited them. They are lights binoculars, so I thought they might be pretty good optics if I could just get the mechanical squared away. So I found a repairman in Oklahoma called Sudderth Optical Repair. And I mailed these binoculars to him. While he had them, I looked to see if I could find a serial number or something. I learned that these binoculars were bought in September of 1945 in Germany by a U.S. Army officer who would be my stepfather, who had just joined the Army at that time and did serve in occupation Germany. He was an artilleryman, so there was a reticle in the eyepieces so that he could judge distance and so on. I think these binoculars have probably seen action in Germany, the Korean conflict, and Vietnam, and that could be why they look so bad. So I sent them for repair and they came back looking like this. Just looked absolutely new and sharp as the dickens. These are a real treasure to me, probably mostly for sentimental reasons, but they give lovely views. So even if you discover a pair of binoculars that look useless, they might be able to be revived. And I would urge you to try that if you have a local binocular repairman, or even mail them off to Oklahoma where they could get some expert care. So that's all I've got. I hope some of the suggestions that I have shared with you will be helpful. You can go out tonight and have a look at the moon and Jupiter and Saturn, I think. And with that, I can take questions, and I will paste in the chat those URLs. Any questions? Doesn't look like it. I'll stop sharing my screen and I will paste some URLs into the chat. Okay? Yeah.
Thank you, Phyllis. That was very interesting.
I hope that it will give you some ideas.
Certainly.
And there are some URLs that should be helpful. Yeah, the Binocular Sky newsletter usually comes out on the 1st of the month. So if you look now, the September one will be there. And if you look on October 1st, he'll probably have the October one there. He's very punctual.
I have some little bird watching binoculars that are, you know, like you showed, the smallest. I hadn't tried those. I'll give them a shot.
Give it a shot. What's the worst it can do? Not show you much? I bet they'll show you more than you think.
Yeah.
I just was so surprised when I was a kid and what I could see through, the family binoculars. We didn't have a telescope, so that's all I could try. Really worked well.
So Phyllis, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Yeah, I lost my sound for a second. I was going to ask about you mentioned the stabilized binoculars, and you said you had an opportunity to try those.
Yeah.
I'm kind of wondering myself, were those kind of gimmicky, or do they actually, I mean, do you have to be fairly steady already, or,
I wish I could remember the dimensions. I'm going to guess they were 8 by 50. They might have been a little smaller. I thought they were gimmicky until I tried them, and I was shocked. Not gimmicky.
really, so it really works that well.
Yeah. You remember Mike Mantini?
Mhm.
He had some one night, and we were looking at comets. And he said, "You want to try these?" And I was like, "Well, I'll be polite and say yes." And I was stunned. They were fabulous. So I would say that they are pricey, but they are not gimmicks. They honestly work. I don't know how. Anything else?
I was just gonna, the other question I was gonna ask is, are there some that work better for people that have trouble merging images?
You're talking to one. Oh boy. Even though I'm far too young, I did have cataract surgery this summer. And so we fixed the acuity, but I've got this muscle thing in my eyes. So I have big trouble merging, whence the glasses. And I haven't done enough viewing with binoculars to know for certain yet. But with these binoculars that have 2 eyepiece focusers, I'm able to get what I need with them. Now, it could be that I pull the eyepieces in and I'm able to do well enough with that. But I haven't tried the 16 by 70s yet. And I'm not sure, they're larger eyepieces. I'm not sure whether I'll need glasses with those or not. But I'm able to do just fine with the 8 by 50s. Actually, they're 7 by 50s, I think. Yep, they are. Crazy. Can you believe these are 76 years old? At any rate, I feel like a smaller pair of binoculars is going to present less trouble, especially if they have individually focusing eyepieces. You could try. Your mileage may vary. Everybody going out with binoculars tonight? Or is it still raining down east? We have a
It was
night.
clearing up when I was out right before the meeting here, but I can't really tell looking out the window.
Yeah, I think the evening is clear here tonight, but the Carolina Panthers are on, so I'm not sure. At any rate, is there anything else?
Kind of sounds like there are no questions. Well, thank you, Phyllis. I really appreciate you taking time out from all your activities,
Yeah.
your astronomical software and everything, development and everything
The timing couldn't have been better, Ian. Timing was perfect. So glad
to hear it. Glad to hear it. So maybe
with those binoculars.
so maybe we'll get you back next year to talk about Deep Sky Planner.
Could do.
So and what kind of cool features you're adding to the software. So all right. Well, again, thank you so much for doing that. I think I may.
I'm gonna sign off now, okay?
Okay, thank you very much.
Good night, everybody.
Good night. Thanks again. So I don't really have any more announcements other than what we talked about at the beginning of the meeting. Does anybody have anything else they'd like to share with the group? I'll actually go ahead and end the live stream for those of you that are watching the recording.